Standing here under the blinding crystal chandeliers of the charity gala, the air is suffocatingly still. Julian, my so-called perfect brother-in-law, just dropped his $1,000 crystal glass. It shattered across the marble floor. But no one moved. His face is the color of dead ash. This morning, he was mocking my worn-out shoes. Now, he's realizing the woman he treated like trash just froze every single bank account he owns. They thought I was the weak link of the family. They were wrong. It all started exactly 1 month ago at a Sunday family gathering. We were at the sprawling summer estate owned by Arthur and Beatrice. They are my aunt and uncle, the people who took me in as a child. But they never once let me forget that I was a burden. A charity case. I sat quietly on the edge of the patio, watching my daughter, Chloe, play on the manicured lawn. Beatrice was lounging on a chaise, loudly complaining about the hired help. Arthur was nursing a scotch, boasting to anyone who would listen about his latest investments. And then, Clara arrived. Clara is their biological daughter, the undisputed golden child. She made her usual grand entrance, with Julian, her husband, trailing right behind her. Clara marched straight over to Chloe. She reached into her designer bag and pulled out a cheap, plastic doll in a crushed box. "Here you go, sweetie," Clara said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "I know your mom can't afford the nice ones. You must be so deprived." My blood ran completely cold. I wanted to tear it out of her hands. But I took a slow breath. I forced a grateful smile. I had a role to play. To them, I was just Eleanor, the struggling single mother. The one who barely scraped by. Clara turned away from Chloe, making sure all eyes were on her. She dramatically swept her hair back, revealing a blindingly bright diamond necklace. "Julian surprised me with it this morning," she announced, her voice echoing across the patio. "It's a flawless cut. 5 carats. Honestly, Eleanor, you should really find a man who can actually provide for you." Arthur chuckled from his chair, raising his glass. "Well, she's used to living off our family's generosity, aren't you, Eleanor?" Beatrice chimed in immediately. "We've carried the financial burden of her existence for decades. It's exhausting." They all laughed. They looked at me with such absolute disgust. I sat there in my faded, off-the-rack dress, clutching a scuffed handbag. I looked exactly like the failure they desperately wanted me to be. Little did they know, I was the founder and majority shareholder of Vanguard Apex. My venture capital firm managed over $4 billion in assets. I could have bought Arthur's entire estate, bulldozed it, and built a skyscraper without checking my bank balance. But that morning, I deliberately chose to fly economy. I deliberately wore scuffed shoes. I wanted to see exactly who they were. In psychology, there is a concept known as overcompensation. The emptiest vessels always make the loudest noise. People who lack a solid core, who build their entire existence on a fragile house of debt and lies, have a desperate, consuming need to show off. They use luxury brands, flashy jewelry, and the deliberate humiliation of those they deem weaker to mask their own crippling fear. A fear of being utterly worthless. When Clara tried to degrade me and my daughter over a cheap plastic toy, she wasn't proving her wealth. She was screaming her insecurity. She was terrified of the hollow reality of her life. Real power doesn't need to prove itself with a 5-carat stone. Real power doesn't need to humiliate a child to feel tall. Real power sits quietly in the corner, watching the clowns perform. I shifted my gaze to Julian. He was standing next to Clara, wearing a tailored suit and a smug grin. He played the part of the elite corporate executive flawlessly. But there was something wrong. His eyes were restless, darting around the yard. He checked his phone every 2 minutes. He looked exactly like a man waiting for a bomb to detonate under his feet. And he was. I already knew his secret. But I didn't say a word. I just smiled, thanked Clara for her profound generosity, and watched them celebrate their imaginary superiority. I let them believe they were untouchable kings and queens of their little world. I let them build their pedestal higher and higher. Because I knew exactly how hard they were about to fall. The next morning, I stepped out of my private elevator on the top floor of the city's tallest financial tower. The polished glass doors slid open silently. The gold lettering on the marble wall read Vanguard Apex. My firm. My lead intelligence officer, David, was already waiting in my office. He's sharp, ruthless, and has been my right hand for 7 years. He handed me a thick, black leather folder. The full financial autopsy on Julian, he said. It's worse than we thought. I sat behind my custom mahogany desk, looking out over the sprawling city skyline. I was no longer the pathetic, struggling single mother from the garden party. I was the founder and majority shareholder of an empire. But they didn't know that. Not yet. I opened the black file. Julian always acted like a financial genius. He was nothing but a desperate, sloppy thief. The documents laid out his entire miserable reality. Over the past 24 months, Julian had quietly siphoned exactly $2 million from his corporate accounts. He didn't even do it cleverly. He used 3 dummy corporations to funnel the cash into high-risk crypto investments. And he lost every single penny. The arrogance of the man. He was drowning in debt while buying his wife 5-carat diamonds to keep up appearances. But the final document in the folder is what truly caught my attention. It was a secret mortgage agreement. Arthur's prized lakefront villa. The very estate where they had just mocked me. The historic home Beatrice constantly bragged about to her socialite friends. Julian had forged Arthur's signature. He used the family estate as collateral to secure a predatory, high-interest loan from an unregulated shadow lender. He needed the cash to cover the $2 million he stole before the annual audit. The terms of the loan were brutal. If Julian missed the final balloon payment, the lenders would seize the property immediately. And that payment was due in exactly 3 days. Arthur and Beatrice thought they were royalty. They looked down on me with such absolute disgust, completely unaware that the ground beneath their feet had already been sold. They were standing on a financial landmine, and Julian's finger was on the trigger. I looked at the forged signature on the deed. I could have warned them. I could have paid off the $2 million with a single wire transfer and saved their precious legacy. But then I remembered the cheap plastic doll Clara handed my daughter. I remembered their cruel laughter. I closed the black folder. I slid it into my briefcase. The massive East Coast charity gala was tonight. Clara and Julian were the guests of honor. They were planning to flaunt their imaginary wealth to the entire city. I picked up my phone and called my stylist. I need the most intimidating gown you have, I told her. It was time to stop playing the victim. It was time to show them the real monster they created. That evening, the grand ballroom of the East Coast Charity Gala was a sea of imported silk and vintage champagne. It was the most exclusive event of the year, a place where the city's elite gathered to measure their worth in auction paddles and whispered gossip. I arrived in a sleek, armored Maybach. The chauffeur opened the door, and I stepped onto the red carpet. I wasn't wearing an off-the-rack clearance dress tonight. I was wearing a custom, midnight black Alexander McQueen gown. It was sharp, elegant, and ruthless. A single, flawless sapphire rested against my collarbone. It was worth more than Julian's entire fictional portfolio. I glided through the golden arches of the ballroom. I spotted them immediately. Arthur and Beatrice were holding court near the center ice sculpture, soaking in the attention. Clara and Julian were right beside them. Clara was flashing her teeth for the photographers, desperately making sure her new diamond necklace caught the light. Julian, however, looked like a dead man walking. He was sweating through his bespoke tuxedo. His eyes darted nervously around the room, and his hands shook every time he checked his phone. The shadow lender's deadline was closing in. As I approached their circle, the conversations around them began to die down. People were staring. Clara turned her head, annoyed by the shift in attention. When her eyes landed on me, her jaw literally dropped. The plastic smile vanished completely. For a moment, she couldn't even speak. She just blinked, her brain failing to process the image of the pathetic cousin she loved to torture, now standing there looking like she owned the building. Which, ironically, my firm did. Clara recovered quickly, her shock morphing into pure, unfiltered venom. She marched over, her heels clicking aggressively against the marble floor. "Eleanor," she hissed, stepping uncomfortably close. "What are you doing here? Did you sneak in through the catering entrance? You know this isn't a costume party. That dress looks like a decent knockoff, but how are you even going to pay for your Uber home?" Arthur and Beatrice exchanged sneers, ready to join in on the humiliation. They expected me to shrink. They expected me to look at my feet and apologize for existing. I didn't flinch. I didn't break eye contact. I looked at Clara with a profound, chilling calmness. "It's not a knockoff, Clara, and I didn't take an Uber. I prefer my own driver." Her eyes narrowed. She opened her mouth to spit another insult, but I didn't let her. I shifted my gaze directly to Julian. He was staring at me, paralyzed. He noticed the sapphire. He noticed the way the event staff subtly parted for me. He was a fraud, but he recognized real power when it was staring him in the face. I took one step closer to him. The air between us turned to ice. "Julian," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but sharp enough to cut glass. "You look terrible. Are you feeling unwell? Or are you just thinking about the lakefront villa?" All the blood drained from his face in an instant. He physically stumbled backward, knocking into a waiter's tray. Crystal glasses shattered across the floor. Clara looked between us, completely bewildered. "What are you talking about?" she snapped. "Julian, what is she talking about?" Julian couldn't answer. He couldn't even breathe. I gave them one last, polite smile. "Enjoy the party," I said smoothly. "It's going to be a night to remember." I walked away, leaving them suffocating in their own panic. They thought they had invited their favorite punching bag to their little coronation. They had no idea they had just welcomed the executioner. The room fell completely silent as the gala chairman tapped his microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice booming over the speakers. "It is my profound honor to introduce our largest benefactor tonight. The visionary founder and majority shareholder of Vanguard Apex. Please welcome Eleanor." I walked smoothly toward the stage. The silk of my Alexander McQueen gown trailed behind me like a shadow. Every camera flashed in the grand ballroom. Every single eye tracked my movement. I glanced at my aunt and uncle as I passed their table. Arthur's jaw hung open in pure shock. Beatrice gripped her vintage pearl necklace so hard the string looked ready to snap. They were staring at a ghost. A ghost they thought they had buried under decades of relentless insults and financial neglect. I stepped up to the podium and adjusted the microphone. I looked out at the sea of wealthy, powerful faces, but my eyes locked directly onto Julian. He was physically trembling now. His polished facade was completely gone. "Thank you all for being here," I started, my voice steady, cold, and echoing through the grand hall. "Tonight is about transparency. It is about clearing away the shadows and revealing the harsh, undeniable truth." Speaking of truth, Vanguard Apex recently conducted an extensive financial audit on several local investment portfolios. Including yours, Julian. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. The elite investors, the politicians, the socialites. They all turned to look at him. The silence that followed was suffocating. "I am officially announcing the immediate freezing of all assets tied to your three dummy corporations," I said calmly, letting each word land like a physical blow. The $2 million you siphoned from your own corporate accounts over the last 24 months is gone. The unregulated crypto investments you desperately tried to hide are completely worthless. And the federal authorities have already been notified of the embezzlement. Julian couldn't even speak. He looked like he was suffocating on dry land. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Two security guards in dark suits immediately approached his table. They grabbed him by the arms and forcefully escorted him toward the exit. The high society executive, the man who mocked my cheap shoes, was being dragged out like a common street thief. Clara leaped to her feet, her face flushed with absolute, unhinged panic. "Julian," she screamed. "What is she doing? Tell them to stop." She spun around, ignoring the hundreds of staring guests, and glared up at me on the stage. "You vicious, jealous liar. You have nothing. You are a pathetic charity case." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't flinch. I just looked down at her from the podium. "Check your phone, Clara," I said simply. She froze. Her hands shook violently as she pulled her phone from her designer clutch. The screen lit up with an urgent, glaring notification from a prominent legal firm. "That is a formal notice of foreclosure," I explained to the dead silent room. "Your husband used Arthur's historic lakefront villa as collateral for a predatory loan from a shadow lender. He defaulted. And since Vanguard Apex acquired that specific debt portfolio this morning, I am now officially foreclosing on the property. The locks will be changed by midnight." Clara dropped her phone. It shattered loudly against the marble floor. Arthur collapsed back into his chair, clutching his chest as he gasped for air. Beatrice began to weep openly, burying her face in her hands. The grand illusion of their perfect, superior family was completely annihilated in under 3 minutes. Society constantly teaches us that family is supposed to be our safest harbor. We are told to forgive, to endure, to keep the peace. But the unspoken paradox is this. Sometimes, family is the most ruthless, toxic social hierarchy of all. They assign you a role from childhood. The failure. The outcast. The burden. And they force you to play that demeaning role for the rest of your life, just to highlight the supposed brilliance of their golden children. But you do not owe anyone your suffering. You do not owe your loyalty to an ecosystem built entirely on your humiliation. Walking away from a toxic bloodline is not an act of betrayal. Exposing their lies is not an act of cruelty. It is the ultimate act of self-defense. I looked down at Clara, who was now sobbing hysterically, desperately clutching her flawless 5-carat diamond necklace. "You told me to find a man who could provide for me," I reminded her quietly, making sure my voice carried across the room. I preferred to build an empire and provide for myself. I stepped away from the podium, leaving them in the ruins of their own making. I stepped down from the podium. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea, their whispers following me as I walked toward the grand exit. But before I could reach the doors, 2 figures desperately blocked my path. It was Arthur and Beatrice. The arrogant sneers they wore just an hour ago were completely gone. Arthur looked like he had aged 20 years. His hands were trembling uncontrollably. Beatrice's expensive makeup was smeared down her cheeks. "Eleanor, please," Arthur stammered, his voice cracking loudly enough for the nearby elite guests to hear. "You can't do this to us. We are your family. We took you in when you had nowhere else to go. We gave you a roof over your head. You have the money, Eleanor, you have to stop this foreclosure. You have to save the estate." I stopped. I looked at the man who had spent my entire childhood reminding me I was a burden. I looked at the woman who had watched her daughter humiliate my child and laughed. "Family," I repeated quietly, letting the word hang in the tense air. "You want to talk about family, Arthur? Let's talk about it. Tell me, do you remember the anonymous private trust that bailed out your failing export business 10 years ago?" He blinked, completely thrown off by the question. Do you remember the shadow investor who paid off your massive IRS tax liabilities 5 years ago? I continued, my voice steady and cold. The mysterious benefactor who essentially kept you from declaring total bankruptcy while you and Beatrice paraded around high society? Arthur's eyes widened in sheer horror. The realization hit him so hard he physically stumbled backward. That was me, I whispered. For 10 years, Vanguard Apex was the invisible safety net keeping this entire fraudulent family afloat. Every vacation, every designer dress, every catered party you threw. I paid for it. Because despite everything you did to me, I still blindly believed in loyalty. Beatrice let out a pathetic, suffocated gasp. She reached out to grab my arm, but I stepped back, looking at her with absolute disgust. But then, I said, my tone turning to ice. I watched Clara hand my daughter a cheap, broken piece of plastic just to make herself feel superior. And I watched you sit there and laugh at us. That was the exact moment I realized my mercy was entirely wasted on you. Arthur opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He was completely broken. I am not seizing your house out of revenge, Arthur, I told him calmly. I am simply cutting off your allowance. You are finally on your own. I turned my back on them and walked out the heavy mahogany doors. The crisp night air hit my face, and for the first time in my life, my chest felt completely light. My driver opened the door to the Maybach. Chloe was fast asleep in the back seat, completely oblivious to the empire that had just crumbled inside that ballroom. I gently stroked her hair as the car pulled away, leaving my toxic past in the rearview mirror forever. 2 weeks have passed since that night. The fallout was swift and merciless. Julian is currently sitting in a federal holding cell, facing up to 15 years for severe corporate fraud. Clara was forced to sell her 5-carat diamond necklace just to afford a mid-tier defense attorney. Ironically, the appraiser informed her the stone was lab-grown and practically worthless anyway. Arthur and Beatrice were officially evicted from the lakefront villa yesterday morning. They are currently renting a cramped, 2-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city, learning to live without the invisible safety net they never knew they had. Standing here now, looking out over the glowing city skyline from my penthouse balcony, I feel a profound sense of closure. When you grow up in the shadow of toxic people, you spend your life thinking you need their approval to step into the light. You desperately believe their false narrative. You think you are the failure they claim you are. But the absolute truth is, you don't need their light. You don't need to beg for a seat at a table that was built on disrespect and lies. If they refuse to see your worth, let them go blind. Build your own table. Create your own halo. And when they finally look up and realize exactly who you really are, make sure you are standing so high they can't even reach the hem of your dress.